In the ruthless arena of power politics, one tactical maneuver separates the influential from the forgotten: the strategic refusal to apologize. This isn't simply stubborn pride. It's a calculated power move drawn from Machiavelli's playbook that silently commands respect while maintaining psychological dominance. Today's most effective leaders have mastered this seemingly counterintuitive approach, understanding that an apology isn't the olive branch we've been taught, but rather a subtle surrender of authority. This documentary deconstructs how this single tactic transforms ordinary interactions into opportunities for establishing dominance, revealing why those who apologize often find themselves perpetually beneath those who never do. From boardrooms to bedrooms, we'll expose how this principle operates beneath conscious awareness, yet fundamentally shapes who rises and who falls. If you've ever wondered why some people effortlessly command respect while others struggle despite good intentions, hit subscribe now and join us for an unfiltered journey into the psychological warfare of everyday life that Machiavelli understood centuries before modern psychology. The modern American vocabulary is littered with apologies. "I'm sorry" escapes our lips dozens of times daily, for bumping into strangers, speaking during meetings, or even expressing our opinions. This epidemic of apologetic behavior isn't accidental. It's a culturally reinforced pattern that subtly determines who rises to power and who remains subordinate. Psychology professor Robert Cialdini at Arizona State University has documented how excessive apologizing creates a dangerous perception loop. When you apologize, he explains, you're not just acknowledging a mistake, you're positioning yourself in a lower status position. His research shows that frequent apologizers are rated as less competent and less confident by peers, regardless of their actual abilities. This insight isn't new. 5 centuries ago in Florence, Niccolò Machiavelli observed the same human dynamics at play in the ruthless political landscape of Renaissance Italy. The philosopher witnessed how leaders who maintained unwavering positions commanded loyalty, while those who backtracked or expressed regret quickly lost their grip on power. His observations would later form the foundation of what many consider the most influential political treatise ever written. The statistics are striking. A 2023 Stanford Business School study revealed that executives who rarely apologized received 37% higher competency ratings from subordinates than their more apologetic counterparts, despite making the same number of objective errors. This counterintuitive finding suggests our perception of leadership is deeply entwined with unapologetic behavior. The gender dimensions cannot be ignored. Women in America apologize approximately 30% more often than men in identical situations, according to research from the University of Waterloo. This disparity creates an invisible barrier to authority that many women must overcome, often without realizing the source of their undermined credibility. Consider the contrasting careers of 2 tech CEOs, Mark Zuckerberg and Elizabeth Holmes. While Holmes ultimately faced legal consequences for fraud at Theranos, analysts note her early success partly stemmed from her notoriously unapologetic stance, a trait she shared with Zuckerberg. Both built billion-dollar valuations while steadfastly refusing to apologize for controversial decisions, embodying Machiavelli's principle that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. The corporate landscape is particularly revealing. When analyzing public statements following company crises, researchers found that organizations issuing direct apologies saw stock prices drop an average of 15% more than those that acknowledged situations without explicitly apologizing. The financial markets, it seems, interpret apologies as admissions of fundamental weakness rather than ethical strength. This pattern extends beyond boardrooms into everyday American life. Dating apps report that profiles featuring apologetic language receive significantly fewer matches. Political candidates who apologize for past statements lose an average of 8 percentage points in polls. Even in courtrooms, studies show that defendants who express remorse receive longer sentences than those who maintain their dignity without apology. The neurological basis for this phenomenon lies in how our brains process dominance cues. MRI studies reveal that witnessing someone apologize activates the same brain regions associated with perceiving submission in primates. At a primitive level, we're wired to interpret apologies as signals of lower hierarchical position. Machiavelli understood this dynamic intuitively. In The Prince, he never explicitly states never apologize, yet the principle permeates his philosophy. He recognized that maintaining authority requires a certain psychological positioning that an apology fundamentally undermines. The person who apologizes places themselves beneath the person receiving the apology, a position no effective leader can afford. Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, a notorious Machiavelli acolyte, famously embodied this principle throughout his diplomatic career. When pressed about controversial decisions in Cambodia, he didn't apologize but rather stated, "I cannot judge the past by the standards of today." This deflection maintained his position of authority while sidestepping moral culpability. The corporate training industry has quietly integrated this principle into leadership development. Executive coaches now advise clients to replace apologies with appreciation statements that acknowledge concerns without surrendering position. Instead of "I'm sorry for the delay," they recommend "Thank you for your patience," a subtle linguistic shift that maintains psychological high ground. The Japanese business world offers a fascinating contrast. Their culture includes formal apology rituals that American executives find bewildering. Yet these elaborate apologies function differently. They're ceremonial rather than subordinating, allowing Japanese leaders to satisfy social expectations while paradoxically reinforcing their authority through the control they exercise over the apology process itself. As we'll explore in the next chapter, Machiavelli's insights into the power dynamics of apology weren't merely observations, they were sophisticated psychological tactics derived from witnessing the brutal rise and fall of Renaissance political figures. His understanding of human nature recognized that respect cannot coexist with perceived weakness, and nothing signals weakness more efficiently than an unnecessary apology. In the dimly lit study of his modest farmhouse outside Florence, exiled from the political life he once commanded, Niccolò Machiavelli penned observations that would forever change how humanity understands power. His fall from political grace provided the perfect laboratory to analyze why some leaders maintain influence while others crumble, and he never once apologized for his controversial conclusions. Machiavelli's own biography reveals the cost of political miscalculation. After serving 14 years as a diplomatic advisor to the Florentine Republic, he was imprisoned and tortured when the Medici family reclaimed power in 1512. Despite this brutal treatment, historical records show he never issued apologies to his tormentors. Instead, he strategically redirected his energy toward documenting the power principles he had observed. The Prince, Machiavelli's most infamous work, contains a striking omission. Across its 26 chapters analyzing effective leadership, the concept of apology never appears as a recommended strategy. This wasn't oversight, but deliberate recognition that power requires unwavering conviction. As he wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are," understanding that apologies create cracks in the carefully constructed facade of authority. Historian Jacob Burckhardt notes that Renaissance Italian politics operated on displays of virtù, not moral virtue but rather unyielding strength of character. Leaders who apologized for their actions were quickly replaced by those who committed identical acts without remorse. Machiavelli merely documented this reality rather than inventing it, observing how successful princes maintained respect through psychological consistency. The famous Machiavellian phrase, "It is better to be feared than loved," isn't merely cruel pragmatism. It's an observation about human psychology. Fear requires respect, while love permits disappointment. By refusing to apologize, a leader maintains the psychological distance necessary for authority. Cesare Borgia, whom Machiavelli greatly admired, exemplified this principle by executing his own administrator publicly for excessive cruelty, not apologizing for the prior brutality, but rather demonstrating absolute control over when violence was appropriate. Contemporary behavioral economists have validated Machiavelli's insights. When test subjects play negotiation games, those who refuse to apologize for aggressive tactics secure deals averaging 15% more favorable than those who express remorse. This apology disadvantage persists even when both parties employ identical negotiation strategies. Only their willingness to apologize changes the outcome. Modern political consultants quietly incorporate Machiavellian wisdom into campaign strategies. Former White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci noted that successful politicians apologize at most once during a campaign. Any more signals fatal weakness. This principle crosses party lines. with both Republican and Democratic strategists acknowledging the fundamental truth of limited contrition. The corporate world offers the clearest modern parallel to Machiavellian courts. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, he cut numerous popular product lines without apology, despite public outcry. This unapologetic focus transformed Apple from near bankruptcy to the world's most valuable company. Similarly, Netflix CEO Reed Hastings initially apologized for pricing changes in 2011, causing the company's stock to plummet 35%. He learned his lesson. Subsequent controversial decisions came without apology, and Netflix's market position strengthened. What makes the non-apology so powerful? Neuroscientist Dr. Robert Sapolsky explains that humans, like other primates, possess neural mechanisms for interpreting hierarchical signals. An apology activates our perception of submission, while non-apology maintains status. From a neurological perspective, Sapolsky notes, the person who doesn't apologize forces others' brains to continue categorizing them as dominant. Far from advocating cruelty, Machiavelli's insights actually reveal profound understanding of human psychology. He recognized that effective leadership sometimes requires prioritizing results over sentiment. The leader who apologizes for necessary but unpopular decisions undermines their ability to implement future policies effectively. This isn't malice, but pragmatic recognition of how authority functions. Machiavelli scholar Maurizio Viroli argues that modern readers misinterpret the absence of apology in Machiavellian thought. It's not that Machiavelli believed leaders should never feel remorse, Viroli explains, but rather that expressing this remorse publicly converts a psychological experience into a political liability. The wise leader might reflect privately while maintaining resolute public confidence. Walk into any high-level corporate negotiation, political debate, or courtroom proceeding in America today, and you'll witness Machiavelli's principles in action, though rarely acknowledged explicitly. The most effective power players have internalized the strategic advantage of never apologizing, treating it as the psychological weapon it truly is. Former CEO of General Electric Jack Welch, who fired the bottom 10% of performers annually in what became known as rank and yank, never apologized for this controversial practice. When challenged about the human cost, he simply stated, "Weak managers are the killers of business." This unyielding stance helped him maintain authority through 2 decades at America's helm of industry. Tellingly, after his retirement, GE's market value plummeted once more. Apologetic leadership took control. The legal profession has perhaps the most sophisticated understanding of strategic non-apology. Attorney Alan Dershowitz advises clients that an apology in American culture is interpreted as a legal admission of guilt. This creates a double bind where moral expectations clash with practical consequences. Those who navigate this tension most effectively use what linguists call non-apology apologies. Statements like, "mistakes were made," or "I regret if anyone was offended," that acknowledge situations without accepting personal responsibility. Wall Street provides a laboratory for observing unapologetic power in action. When J.P. Morgan Chase lost $6 billion in the London whale trading scandal, CEO Jamie Dimon initially called the concerns a tempest in a teapot. Though he later acknowledged the situation was serious, he never personally apologized, instead focusing on forward actions. The result? Unlike executives who issued remorseful statements for similar financial missteps, Dimon strengthened his position and received a pay raise the following year. Political scientist Dr. Marianne Cooper has documented how unapologetic stances correlate with polling strength. When politicians apologize, she notes, their approval ratings drop an average of 8 points and require approximately 11 weeks to recover. This helps explain why seasoned politicians develop the ability to acknowledge concerns without actual apologies, using phrases like, "I understand your frustration," instead of "I'm sorry." The gender dynamics of apology reveal troubling disparities. Executive coach Melody Wilding works with female leaders specifically on apology detox, helping them identify and eliminate unconscious apologetic language. Women who master unapologetic communication see an average 24% increase in successful workplace negotiations, Wilding reports. This isn't about becoming less compassionate, but rather about removing unconscious subordination cues. Media training for executives now explicitly includes apology avoidance strategies. Communication consultant Richard Levick charges Fortune 500 companies substantial fees to train their leaders in what he calls Acknowledgement without apology, a technique that satisfies public expectations for accountability while maintaining psychological dominance. When you apologize, you create a permission structure for punishment, Levick explains. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos exemplifies the Machiavellian approach to non-apology. Despite criticism for workplace conditions, tax strategies, and market dominance, Bezos rarely apologizes, instead focusing on the consumer benefits Amazon provides. This unwavering position contributed to his becoming the world's wealthiest individual. When forced to address controversies, he employs what psychologists call cognitive reframing, presenting contentious decisions as necessary innovations rather than errors requiring apology. The entertainment industry offers particularly visible examples of apology dynamics. When comedian Kevin Hart initially refused to apologize for past controversial statements, he lost his Oscar hosting opportunity. Yet paradoxically, film director James Cameron's famous "I'm King of the World" arrogance and refusal to apologize for difficult on-set behavior has become part of his brand value, increasing rather than diminishing his industry power. The difference? Consistency and domain appropriateness of the unapologetic stance. Research from the Harvard Negotiation Project reveals that expressing regret without apology, saying, "I wish that hadn't happened," rather than, "I'm sorry I did that," preserves negotiating power while still acknowledging concerns. This subtle linguistic distinction maintains authority while demonstrating awareness, exactly the balance Machiavelli observed in successful Renaissance rulers. The strategic non-apology operates in the subconscious battlefield of human interaction. Its power lies not in what is said, but in the psychological dynamics it activates. Dynamics that Machiavelli understood centuries before modern psychology had language to describe them. Dr. Elliot Aronson, pioneer of cognitive dissonance theory, explains why apologies create such problematic perceptions. When someone apologizes, they create cognitive consistency between their words and an assumption of wrongdoing. In essence, the apology itself manufactures the perception of guilt, regardless of actual culpability. This insight helps explain why effective leaders instinctively avoid apologies even for minor matters. They're preventing the psychological foundation of perceived incompetence. The workplace presents countless opportunities to observe these dynamics. Management studies show that employees unconsciously lose confidence in leaders who apologize frequently, rating them an average of 23% lower on leadership capability assessments. This perception gap appears regardless of the leader's technical competence or the significance of the issues for which they apologize. Evolutionary psychology provides further insight. Dr. Joyce Benenson's research on status competition reveals that across cultures, high-status individuals apologize less frequently than lower-status individuals. This pattern appears as early as age 3 in human development, suggesting it's a deeply ingrained aspect of our social architecture rather than merely cultural conditioning. The concept of moral licensing also helps explain the counterintuitive downsides of apology. Behavioral researchers have found that after apologizing, individuals often feel entitled to repeat the same problematic behavior, having paid the moral tax through their apology. Leaders who avoid apologies must find other paths to ethical consistency, often resulting in more substantive behavioral change rather than mere verbal atonement. Political apologies demonstrate these principles on the national stage. When President Bill Clinton finally apologized for the Monica Lewinsky scandal, his approval ratings dropped immediately by 4.5 points, despite public demands for precisely such an apology. In contrast, when President Ronald Reagan addressed the Iran-Contra scandal with the non-apology, "Mistakes were made," his approval rating remained stable. The public claimed to want contrition but unconsciously respected resolution without remorse. The corporate crisis management industry has been transformed by these insights. Major companies now employ apology calculus, sophisticated risk assessment models that weigh the legal, financial, and perception costs of apologizing versus not apologizing. These models consistently show that limited, carefully worded acknowledgments without actual apologies produce better financial outcomes than heartfelt contrition. Relationship psychology reveals similar patterns in personal dynamics. Clinical psychologist Dr. Harriet Lerner notes that contrary to popular wisdom, relationships with the highest reported satisfaction don't feature more frequent apologies. They feature more meaningful behavioral adjustments. Apologies without changed behavior create relationship patterns where words substitute for actions, Lerner explains, echoing Machiavelli's focus on results over appearances. The strategic non-apology isn't simply absence, it's active deployment of alternative responses. Leadership coach Caroline Webb trains executives to replace "I'm sorry" with phrases like, "Going forward, we'll implement." This future-focused language maintains authority while still addressing concerns, creating what psychologists call solution-oriented framing rather than problem-oriented framing. Perhaps most revealing is how we ourselves respond to others' apologies versus non-apologies. Yale University's psychology department found that test subjects reported more respect for individuals who acknowledged problems without apologizing than those who apologized profusely. This respect translated into concrete advantages. Non-apologizers were more likely to be selected for leadership roles and trusted with important decisions. Social media has created new arenas for observing apology dynamics. Analysis of Twitter controversies shows that public figures who issue apologies receive 3.7 times more negative follow-up comments than those who acknowledge situations without apologizing. The digital realm amplifies the Machiavellian insight that apologies don't resolve conflicts but rather invite further attack by signaling vulnerability. The strategic deployment of non-apology isn't about creating a cold, remorseless society. Rather, it's about understanding the actual mechanics of human perception and influence instead of their idealized portrayal. Machiavelli's enduring relevance stems from his willingness to describe power as it functions rather than as we wish it would. Modern leadership requires navigating this complex terrain. Effective leaders develop what psychologists call strategic authenticity, the ability to remain true to their values while understanding how their communications will be perceived. This often means replacing apologies with more effective responses that maintain respect while still addressing legitimate concerns. Corporate America increasingly recognizes this distinction. When JetBlue experienced a massive service meltdown stranding thousands of passengers, CEO David Neeleman issued what analysts call a responsibility acknowledgement rather than an apology. "We failed to deliver on our promise, and we're implementing a customer bill of rights with concrete compensation." This approach, taking clear action without psychological submission, resulted in customer satisfaction scores recovering twice as quickly as airlines that issued traditional apologies for similar failures. The medical profession has perhaps the most sophisticated understanding of these dynamics. After discovering that doctor apologies often triggered malpractice suits rather than preventing them, many hospitals implemented the Michigan model, a protocol where physicians acknowledge outcomes, express regret that patients experience them, and detail prevention measures, all without apologizing for actions. This approach reduced malpractice claims by 36% while improving patient satisfaction, demonstrating that actual accountability matters more than performative contrition. International relations operate on distinctly Machiavellian principles. Diplomatic historian Margaret Macmillan notes that formal apologies between nations typically occur only when power dynamics have already shifted decisively. Nations apologize from positions of overwhelming strength or total defeat, never during actual power contests, Macmillan observes. This pattern persists across cultures and centuries, suggesting it reflects fundamental aspects of group psychology rather than cultural norms. The language pattern of effective non-apology follows consistent structures. Linguistic analysis reveals 4 components: acknowledgement of the situation, expression of appropriate emotion, commitment to improvement, and forward focus. Notably absent is any statement of personal responsibility, the very element that triggers status reduction in human perception. Former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright mastered this formula, acknowledging difficult international situations while never diminishing America's position through apology. Some fields have developed specialized alternatives to apology that maintain relationships while preserving authority. Emergency response leadership employs situation abnormal statements that acknowledge deviations from expectations without assigning blame. Military command structures use after-action reviews that analyze events without requiring personal apologies. These institutional practices reflect collective wisdom about maintaining operational effectiveness while still learning from suboptimal outcomes. Perhaps the most powerful alternative to apology is what psychologists call behavioral contrition, demonstrating through actions rather than words that you understand concerns. When Facebook faced privacy criticisms, Mark Zuckerberg rarely apologized explicitly but implemented significant policy changes. This approach maintained his authority while still addressing the underlying issues more effectively than verbal apologies would have. For individuals seeking to apply these principles ethically, the key distinction is between reflexive apologies that undermine authority and strategic accountability that maintains respect. Leadership expert Brené Brown suggests replacing "I'm sorry" with "I own that" when appropriate, language that demonstrates responsibility without subordination. This distinction allows for moral consistency without the psychological penalties of traditional apology. The Machiavellian insight about apologies reflects a deeper truth. Human social hierarchies operate according to consistent principles, regardless of our conscious awareness. By understanding these dynamics, rather than ignoring them, we can navigate social environments more effectively, while still maintaining ethical commitments. The leader who commands respect without apology isn't necessarily lacking compassion. They may instead possess deeper understanding of how human psychology actually functions. In the words of modern political scientist Robert Greene, who built his career studying Machiavellian principles, the most powerful person in any room is the one who never seems to need anything from anyone else. The strategic non-apology creates precisely this perception of self-sufficiency, not through callousness, but through psychological positioning that commands silent respect without requiring external validation.